Let's talk about trauma dumping. Not as something that bad people do, we're not looking at it as a character flaw, but as something that we all do when we do not have enough containment. We all have done it, and almost all of us have been on the receiving end of it too. In this video, we'll try to understand a pattern that shows up in our relationships when we are overwhelmed, under-resourced, or simply don't know where else to put what we're carrying. Today we're going to look at trauma dumping from both sides, why it happens, what it does to relationships, and how to protect yourself, and how we can protect the people you care about. Because when we understand the mechanics of emotions, when we actually understand why the nervous system does what it does, then we stop blaming each other and we start building relationships that actually sustain us instead of draining us. Stay with me. Let's start with what trauma dumping actually is, because the term gets thrown around a lot and not always accurately. Trauma dumping isn't oversharing because you're dramatic. It isn't a sign that you're needy, selfish. Trauma dumping is what happens when your emotional load exceeds your capacity to hold it alone. And then it spills, often unconsciously, into whoever feels safe enough, available enough, or regulated enough to receive it. It is not intentional harm, but it's a sign of overwhelm. And here's what makes this so tricky. The person doing it usually doesn't realize that they're doing it. They're not thinking, oh, I'm going to emotionally overload this person. They're thinking, I just need to get this out. I need someone to hear me. The problem isn't the need, but the lack of awareness about capacity, theirs and yours. What makes it dumping versus healthy sharing? Not all deep sharing is trauma dumping. Trauma dumping is not mutual vulnerability where both people share and hold space for each other. It's not consensual emotional support where someone asks, do you have space to talk? And respect whatever the answer is. It's not sharing with awareness of the other person's emotional state, but it's one directional. The flow of emotion goes one way, not back and forth. And it feels urgent, uncontained, like it has to come out right now, regardless of context. It's unconscious. The person sharing isn't tracking the other person's capacity or body language, and it often happens without any consent and without the emotional reciprocity that makes sharing feel mutual. Imagine you've had a hard day. You're already carrying something. Maybe you didn't sleep well, or maybe you had a difficult conversation at work. Maybe you're just in one of those quiet internal battles that nobody else can see. And then your phone buzzes. It's a friend. You pick up, and within seconds, before you've even said hello, the flood begins. An argument they had with their partner, a worry about their health, something painful from their past. 15 minutes later, you're holding it all, and they say, thank you, I feel so much better. And they hang up, and you sit there heavier than before, and you might not even know why. That is trauma dumping. And understanding why that happened to both of you is exactly what we're here to unpack. There's a concept in psychology called emotion contagion. It's researched by psychologist Elaine Hatfield and her colleagues. The basic idea is that emotions are contagious. We literally catch feelings from the people around us, and often we don't even realize it. Hatfield's research shows that when someone is in a heightened emotional state, like anxiety or panic or grief, their nervous system broadcasts that state. And our nervous systems pick it up automatically, unconsciously, through facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, even the energy of a room. This is why you can walk into a space and immediately feel the tension, even if no one has said a word. This is why one person's panic can make a whole group feel unsettled. Trauma dumping hijacks this process. When someone unloads their distress onto you without any awareness of your capacity, your nervous system absorbs that distress. You become the container for emotions that aren't yours. And if it happens repeatedly, it leaves you depleted and resentful. Why does this happen? Why do people trauma dump? Usually, it happens when someone is emotionally under-resourced. Let me break this down into the specific reasons. Reason number one, their emotional load exceeds their capacity to hold it. Imagine your nervous system as a container. When life is manageable, that container holds what you're carrying: your stress, your responsibilities, your fears, etc. But when the container gets too full, when there's too much going on, too much responsibility, too much uncertainty, it overflows. And it overflows into the person who feels most available. Psychologist James Gross, one of the leading researchers in emotion regulation, describes different strategies we use to manage what we feel. Some are internal, like reappraising a situation or suppressing a response. Some are external, like seeking support or venting to someone that we trust. Trauma dumping is what happens when internal regulation fails and the person doesn't have a healthy external outlet. So they turn to whoever is near and feels safe, whoever won't reject them. Reason number 2, they have no safe, equal place to process. And sometimes people trauma dump because they simply don't have access to therapy or support groups or friendships that are built on mutual emotional exchange. Maybe they've been the strong one their whole life. Maybe they are in caretaking role, like a parent, a partner. They've never been told that they're allowed to have needs too. Maybe their culture taught them that needing support is a weakness. When the dam finally breaks, it breaks onto whoever happens to be there. Reason 3, the nervous system is dysregulated. When someone is in a dysregulated state, what we call fight, flight, or freeze, or fawn, they are not thinking clearly. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that's responsible for perspective taking, self-awareness, goes offline. In that state, they're not capable of asking, is this the right time? Does this person have capacity? Am I being fair to them? They're just trying to survive the intensity of what they're feeling. And this is not an excuse, it's just an explanation. Understanding it changes how we respond to it. Reason 4, the urgency of isolation. Trauma dumping often happens when someone feels profoundly alone in their experience. Maybe they're carrying something they've never told anyone. Maybe they've been holding it together so long that the weight has become unbearable. Or maybe they're terrified that if they don't get it out right now, they'll never be able to. That urgency, that sense of, I have to tell someone or I'll burst, overrides their ability to be thoughtful about how they share. The more isolated someone feels, the more they tend to over-rely on the 1 or 2 people who do feel safe. And it can actually push those people away over time. Reason 5, they truly don't realize they're doing it. And here's what makes this all so complicated. Most people who trauma dump have no idea it's happening. They think they're just being honest. They think they're sharing. They think the other person will say something if it's too much. They think that because the other person stayed on the phone, everything must be fine. But here's what sociologist Arlie Hochschild research on emotional labor tells us. People who are empathetic, sensitive, or well-regulated often don't say something. They absorb, they hold, they carry, because they've been trained by family, by culture, by gender, socialization to be the emotional absorber, to manage other people's feelings, and it makes them feel a good person. And the person who did the dumping, they walk away feeling lighter. The person who received the dumping, they walk away carrying something that was never theirs to carry. A word about attachment, because this matters. From an attachment theory perspective, trauma dumping often involves what John Bowlby called the safe haven dynamic. When we're distressed, we seek proximity to our attachment figures, the people who feel most emotionally available. But in adulthood, when our attachment system hasn't fully matured, we can unconsciously treat a friend, a partner, or even a colleague as the primary container for all of our distress. Because our nervous system has learned that this is how distress gets soothed. This is why trauma dumping is so often a relational pattern, not just a one-time event. It's rooted in how we learn to get comfort. Now let's talk about what it's like to be on the receiving end of trauma dumping. This is the part that often gets missed. When one person consistently becomes the primary container for another person's distress, the emotional load becomes deeply uneven. And over time, the receiver can feel exhausted, like they're carrying weight that isn't theirs, a way that's hard to articulate. They become resentful, even if they love the person. and they feel guilty for feeling resentful because they were just sharing something hard. That guilt is worth naming because it keeps people silent, and silence keeps the pattern going. Why it's so draining? Because of physiological synchrony. Remember Hatfield's work on emotion contagion? When someone dumps their distress onto you, your nervous system doesn't just hear it, it feels it. There's a phenomenon called physiological synchrony. Our bodies literally sync up with the emotional states of the people around us. Your heart rate may increase, your breathing may shallow. You might notice a knot in your stomach or tightness in your chest. And if you're empathetic, highly sensitive, or what is called highly sensitive person, someone whose nervous system processes stimuli more deeply, you're even more susceptible to this absorption. You don't just hear someone's pain, you carry it, you take it in. The psychodynamic concept of containment is important here. It's developed by Wilfred Bion and later expanded by Donald Winnicott. The idea is that a good container, whether that's a therapist, an attuned parent, or a grounded friend, can hold someone's difficult emotions, metabolize them, and reflect them back in a way that makes them feel more bearable. But here's the key point. Containment requires capacity. If your own container is full, if you're already carrying your own stress, your own unprocessed experience, you don't have room to hold someone else's. And when someone dumps into an already full container, it overflows. The emotions leak out as irritability, avoidance of the person, eventually full burnout. Why people who get dumped on often don't speak up? Why don't people just say, hey, this is too much for me right now? Well, there are several reasons, and they all are worth examining. First, you might not want to hurt the other person. You think, this person is struggling. How can I make this about me? Maybe you've been socialized to prioritize others' emotional needs, especially people who were raised to be caretakers or who were socialized as women. They've been taught explicitly or implicitly that being a good person means being endlessly available. Third, you don't recognize it as a pattern until you're already drained. One heavy conversation feels manageable, 10 in a row, that's when resentment starts building. That's when you start screening calls. Fourth, you feel guilty for having limits. Our culture glorifies selflessness. It stigmatizes boundaries as selfish. So people tell themselves, if I really cared, I could handle this. The truth is, and I want you to really let this in, being safe doesn't mean being unlimited. You can be a loving, deeply supportive person and still have limits. Those two things are not contradictions. In fact, it makes relationships possible. The research on compassion fatigue says that emotional exhaustion results from repeatedly witnessing or absorbing trauma without adequate support or boundaries. Charles Figley, a leading researcher in this area, found that people in caregiving roles, whether professional or personal, are at high risk for burnout and secondary traumatic stress and even physical health complications if they don't have ways to discharge what they're carrying. Secondary traumatic stress means that you can develop symptoms similar to PTSD simply from prolonged exposure to someone else's trauma, which includes intrusive thoughts, hypervigilance, sleep disturbance. It's neurobiological, and it's why boundaries aren't selfish. Boundaries are survival. If you're watching this and thinking, I've done this, take a breath. Most people trauma dump during hard seasons. It's about recognizing a pattern and choosing to adjust it and care about other people as well. Something important to understand about how this pattern works. Most people don't realize they're trauma dumping while it's happening. They realize it afterward, after they've vented and after the relief has settled. And then they replay that conversation and they think, I didn't even ask how they were doing. The whole thing was about me. So that moment of awareness is emotional intelligence developing in real time. That moment is the beginning of change. Signs you might be in this pattern. You might be trauma dumping if you share intense or distressing information without first checking if the other person has capacity. You don't track how the other person seems during or after the conversation. You feel immediate relief after sharing, but you don't notice whether the other person seems heavier. You default to the same one or two people every single time you're in crisis. The conversation is almost entirely about you, or you feel a compulsive urgency to get it out regardless of context or timing. None of these things make you a bad person, but it shows that you're struggling and you need to work on emotional regulation and coping skills. First, ask for consent before going deep. Something like, hey, I'm going through something heavy right now. Do you have the space to talk about it? This simple question respects the other person's capacity. It gives them genuine permission to say no without feeling guilty. It actually deepens trust because it communicates that you see them as a person with their own inner life, not just a receptacle for yours. Then second, spread the load across multiple sources. Don't make one person your sole emotional support structure. Have a therapist, have a journal, have a support group, or few trusted friends who can each hold a small piece. Diversify your containers so no single person gets flooded by you. Third, check in with your own regulation state before you reach out. So, emotional regulation research says that if you are in a highly dysregulated state, shaking, spiraling, unable to think clearly, that might not be the moment to call a friend. It might be the moment to use a grounding technique first, to breathe, to name what's in the room with you, to regulate enough so that when you do share, you're capable of being in a conversation, not just broadcasting your distress. Then, fourth, practice reciprocity. After you share, pause, ask, how are you? What's been going on for you? And actually listen. Because the relationship is a two-way ecosystem. The Gottman research on reciprocity in relationships consistently shows that reciprocity is one of the strongest predictors of relationship satisfaction. When emotional support flows in both directions, when both people feel seen, heard, held, the relationship grows stronger over time. When it flows in only one direction, people accumulate resentment, even in the kindest people. Gottman calls the accumulation of unprocessed resentment flooding. It's one of the primary predictors of relationship dissolution. Now let's talk to the receivers. If you're someone people come to when they're in pain, first I want to say something that you may not hear often enough. That's not a burden, it's a gift. People sense your steadiness. They sense your empathy. They sense that you won't judge them. They understand that you won't turn away. That quality is precious, and it also needs protection. Boundaries don't mean you care less. One of the most persistent misconceptions about boundaries is that they're cold or selfish. But boundaries aren't walls. They're not rejection. They're not a sign that you've given up on someone. Boundaries are how you protect the relationship from burnout. When you set a boundary, you're saying, I care about you and I care about my capacity to keep showing up for you in a way that's genuine. A relationship where one person gives indefinitely isn't a relationship. It's a transaction. And eventually the giver stops giving because they just have nothing left. Here are some actual phrases you can use. If someone starts sharing something heavy without checking in first, you might say, I can tell this is really important to you and I want to be truly present for it. Can we find a time when I have more space to really listen? If you are already at capacity, you can say, I care about you and I can hear that you're going through something hard. I don't have the emotional bandwidth right now to hold this the way it deserves. Can I check in with you tomorrow? Or is there someone else who might have space today? If it becomes a pattern, you say, I've noticed that I'm often the person you come to when things are really hard, and I'm genuinely honored by that. I also want to make sure I'm taking care of myself so I can keep being here for you in a real way. Can we think together about some other sources of support? None of these phrases are rejections. They are invitations to a more sustainable way being in a relationship. Why it can feel impossible to say no. If you were raised in an environment where your emotional attunement was praised or rewarded, where being a good listener made you feel valuable, where you learned early that your job was to manage other people's feelings, then saying no to someone in pain probably feels like a betrayal of your core identity. It might bring up guilt, shame, a sense that you're being cold or selfish. That inner voice that says, but they really need me. Here's what I want you to hear. You can be deeply compassionate and still have limits. Limits don't make you less caring. They make you human. And if you keep giving beyond your capacity, eventually you won't pull back consciously. You will pull back automatically. There will be avoidance, irritability, shutdown. And that's far more damaging to the relationship than a clean, kind boundary. How to protect your nervous system in the moment. You're in a conversation and it's already too much and you can't easily leave. Here are some real-time strategies. Ground yourself. Feel your feet on the floor. Notice your breath. Remind yourself quietly, this is their experience. I am witnessing it. I don't have to absorb it. Visualize a permeable but protective boundary, not a wall, but something like a membrane around you. It allows presence without total merger. You can be with someone in pain without becoming their pain. Don't try to fix it. When someone is trauma dumping, they're often not actually looking for solutions. They're looking for relief. You don't have to solve their problem. You don't have to carry their emotions. You just have to stay present without disappearing into their distress, and gently redirect to resources when appropriate. You can say, this sounds really overwhelming. Have you thought about talking to someone like a therapist or even a crisis line? You deserve real support for this. Now let's zoom out for a moment, because trauma dumping isn't just about individual behavior. It's about a society that has never adequately taught people how to regulate their own emotions or how to ask for help in ways that are sustainable. We live in a culture that glorifies emotional stoicism in some groups, and it dismisses emotional needs in others. We live in a culture that underfunds mental health resources so that people have nowhere to take their pain except to each other. A culture where many people reach adulthood having never learned what healthy emotional expression even looks like. So when the pain becomes too much, it goes somewhere. And it usually goes to whoever is closest. According to emotion regulation process model, we have 5 key strategies to manage emotional experience. The first is situation selection, choosing or avoiding situations that trigger certain emotions. The second is situation modification, changing the situation itself. The third is attentional deployment. We are redirecting where our attention goes, like through mindfulness or distraction. The fourth is cognitive reappraisal, changing how you think about what's happening. And the fifth is response modulation, managing the physiological or behavioral response once the emotion is already activated. Trauma dumping happens most often when someone has bypassed the first 4 strategies entirely, or when they're so dysregulated that none of the strategies feels even accessible. They're stuck in response modulation mode, trying to discharge the emotion as fast as possible. And the fastest discharge is to offload it onto someone else. This is why building emotion regulation skills isn't just self-help, it's relational care. When you learn to regulate your own nervous system, you stop needing to use other people's nervous systems to do it for you. What healthy containment actually looks like. The truth is, we all need people who can hold space for us when we're struggling. Healthy containment has some specific qualities. It's mutual, both people can give and receive. It's boundaried, both people can say not right now, and it's not rupturing the relationship. And it's sustainable. Neither person is consistently depleted by the exchange. Healthy containment looks like asking before sharing, noticing the other person's capacity, being willing to hear not tonight without, being damaged. Having multiple sources of support is important. So no single relationship becomes your entire emotional support. Here's what I want you to take away from this talk. Trauma dumping is not a moral failure, and it doesn't mean that you are selfish or too much. It's a signal that someone, maybe you, maybe someone you love, needs more containment, more support, more internal resources that they currently have access to. And learning to notice it in ourselves and in our relationships is super important. If you've trauma dumped in the past, it doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a person who was overwhelmed and didn't yet have the tools to manage it differently. If you're someone who gets dumped on, it doesn't mean that you're weak. It means that you're safe, and it means that you've probably been carrying more than your share for a very long time. So you're allowed to put some of that down. You're allowed to have limits. You're allowed to say, I love you and I can't hold this right now. Because sustainable relationships, the ones that last, the ones that actually nourish both people, aren't built on one person carrying everything. They are built on reciprocity, awareness, and mutual respect for each other's capacity. Whether you're the one who's been dumping or the one who's been receiving, there is room to grow and adjust. And that's the whole point of understanding this. Thank you for being here and sharing comments. Have you been trauma dumping or have you been dumped on? How did you cope with it? Okay, thank you so much for watching. Take care.